The time will soon be upon us. Nintendo will very soon need to enter mass manufacture of their 8th major home console. But what will that look like? What are the issues they need to deal with when considering a manufacturing enterprise of this huge scale? What complexities and challenges will they face, and what should we look out for over the coming months before the new system rockets out of our dreams and into most reputable retail outlets? And are some of the complexities we'll uncover part of the reason for the purported internal delay of the Switch 2 in the first place? Grab a cup of something from Brewster's and settle in, because this is a Nintendo Forecast deep dive into Nintendo's console manufacturing approach. To give us an idea of the complexity of what we're talking about, check out the images on screen courtesy of Fictive, a brilliant teardown site which analysed the Switch early on. Even though it forms into one cohesive system in our hands, the sheer number of precision-engineered parts, more perhaps for Nintendo than other video game systems due to the surfeit of additional devices like different Joy-Con, the dock and the Joy-Con grip, make for a highly complex production proposition. Fictive's comments, coming from a design perspective, are pretty interesting, and they conclude that, in true Nintendo fashion, we also see evidence of design for assembly considerations everywhere. Even parts that could be installed agnostic of direction are provided with affordances and cues, so that assembly can only be done one way. Nintendo engineers don't do ambiguity. Before they even reach the factory floor, these consoles have been sweated over and precision designed not just for the end user, but also with the intent that manufacture should be as smooth as possible. Nintendo put a lot of care and planning into their systems, and you can bet that the Switch Successor has also been similarly sweated over. But best laid plans often do go astray, and we know that behind the scenes, manufacturing the new console will not be easy for Nintendo. Manufacturing anything is hard, but in days gone by, Nintendo had something of a cushion for big transitions like this. Whenever they launched a handheld console, they always had a home console as a belt and braces in case the launch of the new prospect failed. And certainly the failure of the Wii U was not nearly as disastrous as it could have been for them as a result of the Nintendo 3DS. But this is the big one. The Switch has already had an unusually long lifespan, and despite having had a superb run, the game library feels like it's starting to suck on fumes. Nintendo needs the next system to be a hit, and that means manufacturing has got to go perfectly. We also know that it has sometimes been a bit of a nightmare for them in the past. For one thing, their annual report contains a standard statement explaining the risks they face. It says, dependency on outside manufacturers. Nintendo commissions a number of outside manufacturers to produce key components or assemble finished products. In the event one or more of these businesses fail, Nintendo may have difficulty procuring key components or manufacturing its products. In addition, suppliers may be unable to provide necessary components on a timely basis. A shortage of key components could cause marginal decline due to higher costs, shortages of products, and quality control issues. These issues may impair the relationship between Nintendo and its suppliers. Furthermore, as many suppliers' production facilities are located overseas, potential production interruptions caused by societal violence, natural disasters, or any other accidents in the area would negatively affect Nintendo's business. However, this is all not just an abstract concern. Former Nintendo employee Krista Yang mentioned in a recent Kit and Krista podcast that we heard about the manufacturing woes at Nintendo a lot, and we know from Nintendo's own website that they have had to send people from the Japanese offices over to supervise production in the past. For example, Kazuya Yoneyama was interviewed by Satoru Iwata in 2009 about the Nintendo DSi XL, and he talked personally about going over to China to supervise production. But the DSi XL was just one iterative upgrade of an existing system in a country which had manufactured Nintendo products for decades. This is a whole new proposition, a sequel to Nintendo's best-selling home console and conceivably the most successful Nintendo console ever, if not the greatest selling console outright, by the time the final numbers are counted. Add to this the fact that the world has moved on, and mass tech manufacturing is in a very different place now, and we come to a difficult crossroads for Nintendo. So what do we know? First of all, Nintendo has already made some changes in recent years, moving Switch manufacture out of China and into Vietnam around 2019. We also know some manufacturing work is still taking place in Taiwan, but given the current fragile state of international relations where China and Taiwan are concerned, you can bet that a corporation as cautious and contingency-minded as Nintendo is looking to try and secure a longer-term position. Indeed, they already, though probably unrelatedly, closed down their Taiwanese offices in 2014. Nevertheless, relocating this kind of manufacturing out of China is so common that it has its own name. It's called the China Plus One strategy. Yes, fall back on Chinese manufacturing at times, but also have an additional manufacturing solution at hand. But I'm not sure Nintendo needs this level of complexity. After all, while it's possible to move manufacturing chains in the middle of a console's life cycle, as they did this era with the Switch, it's far easier to start as you mean to go on and build the resilient, robust manufacturing chain you want from day one. Indeed, while there are many possible contributing factors to the alleged internal delay of the next console, it's hard to look past one massively important contributing factor: the need to get the manufacturing line absolutely airtight. Having a strong and resilient manufacturing chain has many benefits. It stops potential scarcity, which would lead to scalping and, worse for Nintendo, missed sales opportunities on games while people just don't own their next console. It also allows them, if they get it right, to save money as they can build efficiencies within the existing locations, allowing them to produce faster and cheaper, savings that are generally referred to as economies of scale. In fact, the video game console manufacturing business lends itself better than many tech items to these economies of scale. If we quote Satoru Iwata from 2012 on this point, he said, "Nintendo produces one model of a product in much larger quantities than the companies in other industries can possibly do. As a result, considering the components included in our products, we have been able to contain the total production costs." Iwata-san also noted that sometimes their products are produced at an inconsistent rate, so they need the capacity to scale up and down console manufacture across the year, which also adds to the headaches that are presented to them. Now, while there are many complex mechanical and electrical goods produced at scale, Nintendo's proposition is relatively unusual. While there may be iterative changes to the specific model, for all intents and purposes, one would expect the next system to still be manufactured in 2030 and probably a good while beyond. Nobody expects the new phone or Fitbit or electronic lawnmower or television to necessarily be in constant production for the same length of time. Nintendo also has a reputation to maintain, and its website contains a detailed document on corporate social responsibility around procurement, with guidelines highlighting, of course, their aspiration to put smiles on the faces of everything Nintendo touches. As the document states, in order to provide high-quality products to consumers and have them smile, we believe it's important that our production partners involved in product development, material sourcing, and production are also smiling. We understand that each production partner has already incorporated CSR values into their respective business activities based on local and regional legal requirements and social norms, as well as international principles regarding fair trade and human rights. The detailed document, first produced in 2011 and last revived in 2021, covers an extensive set of areas linked to workers' rights, and while these are probably largely boilerplate across the bigger name tech manufacturers, the danger for Nintendo is especially acute if they are found as having used exploitative practices given their positive corporate reputation. Still, as they look to establish new supply chains and develop bonds with new partners, particularly in advance of the development of a new system, ensuring compliance with these principles creates an additional layer of complexity in the production process. A detailed feature on their website contains an employee comment from Jason Eller, who was responsible for operation planning and analysis for Nintendo America, who explained how intensive this work could be. He explained, "We met directly with management, including HR and CSR representatives from each vendor, and toured their warehouses, production operations, cafeterias, social areas, and dormitories." So here's the thing, it's not just that Nintendo wants to ensure that it is maintaining the high standards commensurate with its strong reputation. They also rely on having a highly skilled, well-trained and well-remunerated workforce on the manufacturing end, because video game consoles are not an area of production that lends itself to excessive automation. In a 2016 investor briefing ahead of the manufacture of what was then codenamed the Nintendo NX, then CEO Kimishima-san said, "Regarding the manufacture of our products in this setting, let me just note that devices like ours, which are complicated and made in amounts that vary widely from month to month, do not lend themselves to the kind of automation that is easy to introduce for devices with simple structures that are made in constant amounts. Are there more efficient ways of determining which processes automate and how? Can automation deal better with changes? These are the kind of questions we continue to address. We are in close communication with our partners who manufacture our products." Evidently, Nintendo aren't alone in manufacturing complex items like video game consoles. Sony and Microsoft at least have the experience of iterative console generations, but Nintendo's price point is usually a little bit lower, which makes the margin for error somewhat tighter. Plus, unlike Sony and Microsoft, they don't have experience of producing a tremendous range of other electronic products. Nintendo is not some vastly diversified tech giant. It's an entertainment company that happens to create its own technology. This also puts Nintendo at a disadvantage against sharp-elbowed competitors in the chase for key components. And when people think of component competition, it tends to be of problems arising from COVID, and yet the fact is that in 2017 and 2018, they had the exact same issue. The Wall Street Journal reported that despite the success of the early Switch and the strong demand for the console, as they say, the problem is an industry-wide capacity shortage for components used in smartphones, computer servers, and other digital devices. These include the NAND flash memory chips that store data, liquid crystal displays, and the tiny motors that enable the Switch's handheld controllers to imitate the feel of an ice cube shaking in a glass. It's rather ironic that it wasn't the core Switch, but a relatively underutilized Joy-Con feature that caused this problem, and while the situation was unforeseen, trying to ensure reliable supplies of everything it needs is clearly going to be a priority for Nintendo going forward if they're going to maintain a smooth transition into the next console generation. In 2018, then Nintendo President Kimishima talked of the large number of components the Switch required, and he said, "I think we must own up to the fact that our initial projections were too conservative. The Nintendo Switch system itself is made from a huge number of components, and we've made urgent requests to many of our contract manufacturer to ramp up production, with some of them even installing additional production lines." Of course, one way they ultimately created additional production lines was the transition to producing in Vietnam. Yes, the expansion into Vietnam may have been partially triggered by rising costs of Chinese labor, but Vietnam does provide many advantages in addition, particularly its international airports and seaports and its strong rail links. The website Vietnam Briefing provides a summary of the advantages of being based in Vietnam, which is worth taking on board, and let's just take a moment to review their observations. Firstly, they say, Vietnam is touted as a low-cost manufacturer with competitive labour costs. On average, Vietnam's labour costs are half as much as China's labour costs, at $2.99 per hour compared to $6.50 per hour, respectively. This contributes to Vietnam's increasing position as a more cost-effective alternative to its regional counterparts. Secondly, Vietnam has a relatively large, well-educated labour force, making it an attractive hub for production. In addition, the government has provided various vocational, educational, and training sessions to equip the workforce. With the current labour shortage and lack of skilled workers in specific industries such as IT, the government has put additional strategies and programs in place. It also comments that a plethora of free trade agreements such as the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement or the UK-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, also strengthen Vietnam's competitiveness as a low-cost manufacturing export hub. Such trade agreements allow Vietnam to take advantage of reduced tariffs, both within the ASEAN economic community and with the EU and US, to attract exporting companies to produce in Vietnam and export to partners outside the region. Additionally, Vietnam has benefited from the fallout of the US-China trade war, as higher US tariffs on a wide range of Chinese exports have driven manufacturers to switch production away from China toward alternative manufacturing hubs such as Vietnam. Okay, so That explains the attraction of Vietnam as a location, but of course Nintendo are far from the only company to have seen the benefits of building connections with the South China Sea's most promising manufacturing up-and-comer. In fact, the government of Vietnam, seeing the potential to capitalize on uncertainty around Taiwan and China, earlier this year announced a series of tax incentives and investment funds that, from mid-2024, will bolster the production of semiconductors in Vietnam. DigiTimes Asia quotes Jensen Huang, CEO of Switch chip manufacturer Nvidia, as declaring Vietnam as its second home. A Reuters article elucidated. The base will be for attracting talent from around the world to contribute to the development of Vietnam's semiconductor ecosystem and digitalization, the Vietnamese government stated, citing Huang after its meeting with Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh. Before we go on, it's probably worth taking a step back and getting our heads around semiconductors. I've mentioned them a few times, and they're one of the key aspects to consider in manufacture of video game consoles, an aspect of electronic production that rose to prominence in the public eye after the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted supply chains and massively spiked demand. But they are really an essential part of the considerations Nintendo must make when it comes to manufacture of their next console. To provide much of the commentary that follows, I am indebted to Nathan Lotz's March 2023 working paper for the Office of Industry and Competitiveness Analysis, which is linked in the show notes. Semiconductors, as the name suggests, are substances that can act both as a conductor of electric current and an insulator, allowing them to be on-off switches. Many semiconductors can be used in any one piece of technology, from highly engineered central processing units (CPUs) to temperature sensors. The Lotzi paper sets out helpfully the three main types of semiconductors which are required by game console manufacturers, and you can see the example they provide on the screen right now. The three types are logic chips, which process information and execute software, memory chips, which store information, and DAO chips, which stand for discrete, analog, and other, which are used for a range of specific tasks like power management and light sensing. On manufacturing, I'm going to quote the paper directly. The production of semiconductors can also be divided into three main categories: design, front-end manufacturing, and back-end manufacturing. Design refers to the overall design of a semiconductor device and its underlying circuitry. Front-end manufacturing refers to the actual fabrication of the integrated circuit onto a silicon wafer, while back-end manufacturing refers to assembly, testing, and packaging activities. For our purposes, design is mostly in the hands of Nvidia and Nintendo's core development team, and we'll discuss the back-end manufacture of the chips later in the video, but let's drill down on front-end manufacturing, the fabrication of the actual chips first of all. The Lotzi paper demonstrates the broad range of applications for which chips are required, of which consumer electronics, including video games, are only 12% of the total market, at least using 2021 figures. Furthermore, we can see that the global sales by semiconductor type, the largest requirement being for memory chips and logic chips, the latter of which would include the central processing units and graphical processing units of the console. With a product like a console being so hungry for semiconductors, Nintendo have to be globally focused to remain competitive. A 2024 Financial Times article noted only 3 companies in the world, Intel, Samsung, and TSMC, are capable of mass-producing chips powerful and small enough for today's most advanced mobile technologies. Switch chips are produced by TSMC, or to give them their full name, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. TSMC are currently in a race to develop ever smaller chips, while Nintendo, who famously are looking to apply what Game Boy creator Gunpei Yokoi termed lateral thinking with seasoned technology, are not likely to be using the ultra cutting-edge 2nm chips just yet. They are still competing in the same ecosystem, and the market is hotting up. The FT reports that global chip sales hit well over $500 billion last year, and semiconductors could become a $1 trillion industry by the end of this decade, according to consultants McKinsey. TSMC, with its market capitalization of $575 billion, dominates Taiwan's economy and the global market for the world's very smallest cutting-edge chips. Of course, with the US's CHIPS Act and China's chipmaker SMIC entering the field and Nvidia focusing on leveraging AI tech, it is a febrile atmosphere and a fluid marketplace. Nintendo appear to have hitched their wagon quite decisively to Nvidia, which may work out very well for them if it can use AI upscaling as a core technology of its new machine. Memory chips, on the other hand, are sourced more significantly from South Korea, which the working paper states accounts for 58% of the value added in memory chip design compared to just 28% for the United States. Then there are chips for power management, with prominent suppliers available to Nintendo, including the US's Texas Instruments and Taiwan's Richtech. Not all of Nintendo's tech needs to be sourced far from home, though. Japanese company RON provides the ambient lighting sensor for the current Nintendo Switch and has a highly diversified manufacturing base in Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, and China. As for some of Nintendo's more bespoke tech, let's quote from the research paper one last time. The Switch contains 4 non-optoelectric sensors, a Texas Instruments, United States, remote local temperature sensor, and 3 ST Microelectronics, Netherlands, accelerator gyroscopes, 1 in the console and 1 in each controller. These sensors are necessary for motion controls, for example, when returning a tennis serve in Nintendo Switch Sports or aiming an ancient bow in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The problem is that it's not just a case of grabbing these off the shelf. Setting up semiconductor plants is tricky, as Japan itself has found out in recent years. The Japan Times noted in a recent article, Japan's semiconductor ambitions will have to contend with the sometimes messy reality on the ground. Indeed, as semiconductor plants have begun to descend on towns, the companies have had to deal with various issues, with TSMC's Kumamoto plant facing water and staffing shortages. Big problem. Still, if the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company based in Kumamoto in the western Japan can overcome these teething problems and thrive, it certainly will be a great insurance policy for Nintendo in the event that there are difficulties with production in Taiwan in the years ahead. And this is certainly something that many companies are making contingency plans around. A recent Financial Times article cites the chief financial officer of one company who said his group was looking to put a second headquarters in Singapore because the group was expanding production in 2 Southeast Asian countries. The article says that other people involved in similar discussions said Singapore, Japan, Switzerland, or the Netherlands were options for establishing second headquarters. So, how can Nintendo remain nimble in such a complicated development environment? For one thing, its long R&D cycles are, I'm sure, not just dedicated to coming up with creative, off-the-wall ideas like motion controls or double-screen technology. Indeed, the latter, by the various accounts, was partly a challenge from former President Hiroshi Yamauchi. No, these cycles are also opportunities to look at the potential of different materials and see whether they can achieve what they want with more widely available, or at least cheaper, materials. Planning ahead in this instance would pay huge dividends, as even a minuscule saving would prove hugely valuable, multiplied across potentially 100 million or more consoles sold. I also have to wonder if one reason for the apparent internal delay to the Switch Successor console was linked to this, and I know there's no definitive proof that it was ever scheduled for 2024, but let's just entertain the idea that the delay was in fact real. Think about it. With Nvidia moving big time into Vietnam, with many Taiwanese companies diversifying, including the TSMC setting up in Japan itself, the landscape for manufacturing a console is changing faster than it has for decades. All the more reason to wait to see how the pieces slot into place before committing to one strategy or location over another. Another of the key benefits Nintendo has is a large amount of cash in hand, a topic I covered some more in the video on the card at the top, or linked to the bottom, and which Satoru Iwata in 2008 explained in some detail, particularly with regard to Nintendo's manufacturing endeavours. The gamer-hearted maverick said, "Please understand that Nintendo's business shoulders huge business risks. For example, when we were still developing Wii or DS, no one could tell these products would be successful. Of course, Nintendo was doing its best to make them successful, but as of the time of developments, the reaction from the industry were rather skeptical. It was even said around that time that Nintendo was running counter to common sense in the world. What if Nintendo did not have enough money at that time? Our partner corporations that have been providing us with many different technologies and components, and our partner subcontractors to manufacture our products must have held grave concerns. If they had been concerned and feared that Nintendo might not succeed, and that Nintendo might not be able to pay as promised, they would not have maximized their cooperation with us when we really needed their efforts. Also, if we had to disclose all of our plans on the new unique hardware a year and a half or 2 years before its completion in order to solicit for necessary money from the stock markets or banks, what would otherwise have been an unexpected surprise would not have generated the positive effects on the potential customers when we would have finally demonstrated the tangible product. In terms of the traditional efficiency of funds operations, especially for those who are reading our financial statements from outside of the industry, our situation may appear inefficient. However, it is the unique characteristic of our business operations that you cannot dare to challenge some bold tactics unless you have a strong enough financial backing. To this end, we need our own capital adequacy. So Iwata-san's comments show Nintendo had a desire to be able to move quickly, but ultimately the time to move is coming and they're going to have to make a big and dramatic investment. From that time, how long would it be until the console lands? Business Insider reported in September 2016 about this very topic. At the time, 6 months ahead of the Nintendo Switch launch, they noted that the new console had entered the early stage of production in factories. Business Insider said, according to DigiTimes, Taiwanese manufacturing company Foxconn had begun trial production on the as-yet unannounced Nintendo NX with a production goal of around 10 million units per year. That would be twice as many as the Wii U sold in the first year. Foxconn is the manufacturing home of most major personal electronics, from iPhone to Xbox. For clarification, trial production doesn't mean the units produced during this process will find their way onto store shelves. Basically, this is where manufacturers do a test run of production so they can work out the kinks in the process before the real show starts. September 2016, where they were doing first trials, to launch at the beginning of March was a gap of 6 to 7 months. So really we're looking at 6 months prior to release before they really have to announce or risk the whole thing being spoiled by production leaks. But of course, an initial run of 10 million might have fitted their expectations for the Nintendo Switch, coming off the back of the torrid experience of the Wii U's numbers, but it is small for a console looking to supersede the mighty Nintendo Switch. Therefore, I would anticipate them producing more Switch 2 consoles compared to their initial production of the first one. If we're anticipating, let's say, a 6 to 9 month lead time in terms of manufacture of the console, the main part of manufacture would need to begin ramping up June to September if they're looking to release at the end of the 2024 to 2025 financial year, which still seems to be the most optimal point for them, and therefore the most probable, especially given their current somnolent state of Switch game releases. I have to give a shout out here to commenter Nukatha, who on a previous video made what I thought was a really intriguing point. I'll read the comment. Theory: Nintendo World Championship game was just leaked by the ESRB. I suggest that the game will have a score attack mode used to qualify for an in-real-life NWC 2024 event in June, following a similar format to 2015 and 2017. Nintendo will announce Switch 2 there, with contestants playing several new games in the final rounds. I thought this was a tantalizing possibility, and of course a June-July climax to the World Championships would certainly start to enter the time frame in which a console might be manufactured. It would certainly be an amazing move for Nintendo to do this, although given that they've never released a sequel console like this before, I think the absolute chances have to be low. It's a 10% shout, but an amazing 10% shout that I thought was worth a mention. Okay, so what have we learned so far? We know that manufacturing chains are evolving fast, and the old model of chips being produced in Taiwan and back-end manufacturing taking place in China is rapidly disintegrating. We know that Nintendo's own corporate governance rules mean it will need to take a very active role in ensuring that future supply chains meet the company's high standards. We know from the same corporate governance report that they have been particularly holding discussions around sustainability, which would be pertinent to trying to keep the carbon footprint of their often very carbon-intensive consoles at a minimum. We know that they have already begun transitioning manufacture from China to Vietnam, and they may well continue this given the interest of Nvidia in building up their Vietnamese base of operations. And we have some insights into strategies they use to punch above their weight in the manufacturing space, including maintaining a strong capital adequacy. But manufacture, while vital, isn't the only key part of Nintendo's production journey, as they also need to think about distribution. If you would like to see a similar breakdown of Nintendo's distribution strategies in future, please let me know and hit subscribe in the meantime. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video, and if you've enjoyed, why not explore some of the other videos on screen right now? Take care and see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.